I'm here today with Jordy, and I'd love to welcome you into the conversation, Jordy. It's great to be with you. I'd love for you to introduce yourself, let us know who you are, and we'll go from there, my good friend.
Absolutely. Thank you, C. Uh, Look, my full name is very, very long, but as I figure out quite early in my life, that's not a very sustainable name to have. It's so long that people can't pronounce it. I've been called Jordy ever since I was 3 years old, and an American kid called me so. I'm a consultant. I actually lead consulting practice in cloud infrastructure security services for my company. Uh, I work for a large Indian major, and over the last few years that I have been consulting with different organizations across the globe, and I've worked across Europe, America, and Australia, India, and Australia now. What I have seen is a lot of companies are becoming very, very concerned on sustainability of their operations. From a profiteering mindset, people are now coming over to sustainability, and I find this conversation very interesting. And I'd love to explore that with you, Steve.
Thank you so much, Jordy. The pleasure is all mine, my good friend. I know you've done some blogging or some writing on LinkedIn. Likewise, you have numerous experiences. And as you know, we have the conference coming up. I wish we would have met sooner so I could have pulled you in and what have you. But given that the next event will happen in the future, we'll do definitely some stuff together. I'd love your thinking on kind of the narrative, the themes. Just kind of
Mhm.
share with us where your thoughts are, my good friend.
Absolutely. See, as I was going through my journey and I was talking to people, leaders, business leaders, and even leaders of social organizations on sustainability, I realized that there was something that was a little bit wrong with that part. The wrong with part was people look at sustainability from a short-term perspective. Oh, there is a black swan which is happening. How do I get past that? And that gets rolled into a sustainability plan. You know what? 5 years from now, this three business changes can happen. How can I be sustainable enough to tide over that part? What I found missing was two things, rather. The first missing thing was people were not taking sustainability at a very long-term level, which I believe is the right part of it. The second part I thought was, as you go along this, you cannot have a sustainable business plan. You can have sustainable business teams, but not a plan. You will have to learn along the way. Disruptions will come and disrupt your business. You have to learn from it and then implement it back. And that I believe was the core of anti-fragility, learning from your experiences, disruptions, and making yourself, your business, your organization a better place. And I also realized that inherently we have a lot of fragility in ourselves. We can never do away with it. So when I wrote my blog and I wrote the article on LinkedIn, I came up with what is known as a fragility scale. The reason I came up with the fragility scale is I realized that true anti-fragility is zero fragility. That by the nature of this world and God's gift to us can never be zero. We can never be completely anti-fragile, neither can organizations be. There can be that one single black swan event that can actually come and wipe a lot of things out. Dinosaurs were wiped out, they were much larger creatures than us. But what I feel is if you keep learning throughout the journey as you go from one state to another state, you will be increasing your anti-fragility score and reducing your fragility score. And this reduction will actually help you sustain yourself through different difficult circumstances. This doesn't mean you will not be disrupted, doesn't mean you will not fail. It just means that when you are disrupted, when you fail, you can bounce back. And when something of a similar nature happens the next time, you will be disrupted less, or if you are lucky, you'll not be disrupted at all. And I would like to quote just one example out here. So if you look at this example, look at the example of something like an Uber. Uh, Uber got disrupted as much as taxi services got during this COVID-19 pandemic. But while the taxi services were still scrambling to get their app running, making it really robust so that people in need could book a taxi, Uber had a very robust app. People were Ubering out. I sincerely feel that the taxi services should learn a lot from, from what Uber did. Uber perfected their app over a long period of time, and when the need for that app actually to stand up came, it served its purpose. It never failed. Taxi services had a half-baked app. At least in Australia, they had a half-baked app. never worked fine, and when the need came, didn't really work very well. And I think that's a great learning for all of us out here, not to think that we are a know-it-all, we know everything, but to keep learning, be a learn-it-all, and keep learning from everything that happens in our life.
Well said, Jordy. And I think, very openly, one of the challenges, as of course the COVID crisis has manifested, one of the challenges as people have called out anti-fragility and anti-fragile and resilience and what have you, is a lot of the conversation is in absolutes. And exactly to your point, anti-fragility is on a scale. You may be anti-fragile to one thing, but not anti-fragile to another thing, or fragile to something versus something else. So I think I really appreciate the degree of nuance that you're putting into the work that you're doing. Can you talk about sort of, Jordy, other examples of how perhaps you've leveraged the work and how you've applied it in, with clients, with people really around the world?
Absolutely, we certainly can talk about that. Before I go there, I'd like to share a very personal example. See, if you look at the Indian subcontinent, you will find a lot of the senior people who are out there are ex-military personnel. A lot of senior people in business are ex-military personnel. And I've always been intrigued by this military business, if I may use the word, a nexus. How is it like that? How is it that someone who was a major in an army today happens to be the CEO of a small IT company? What does he have to take to run this? He didn't know IT. He was actually, he knows more about guns, and I could have understood if he was the CEO of a gun manufacturer, but he's not. So I decided to query one of my father's very close friends who retired from the Indian Army as a major, saying, why do you think army guys are able to sustain themselves in the business world even after their practical lives in the army career are over? They served till about the age of 60. And here's a very interesting thing he told me. He said, look, most of the time when you go to a business school or you go to a school, they teach you something and they expect you to implement that thing in totality. They teach you about a theorem. The theorem cannot change. You go implement it. In army, we don't do that. In army, we don't teach you what to do in a circumstance. We teach you how to respond to a circumstance. And because you know how to respond to a circumstance, every time a new circumstance comes in, you know how to think and what to respond to. You do not have a template to implement. You create the template every time. And every time you've created the template, you have a new template in your book.
Yeah.
This is what makes us very different.
Yeah.
And he said there are four things that they teach you in the Army Academy. And he said those four things are observe, observe the whole environment around you. Think. After you have thought about it, you do it. Once you have done it, reflect on it and see what can you learn from it. And he says this whole principle, which he said was OTDR, is the key to a success for any individual. He says you have to observe, you have to think before you act. But once you do it, be 100% committed to it, even if that may be a slight failure, because you will reflect on it, learn on it, and then once you go ahead from that learning, you will not fail in that enterprise again. This is very, very, very
Yeah.
powerful one because I felt that this should be implemented not just by individuals but also by organizations. More often than not, every organization tends to have a very fixed set of parameters in which they perform, parameters in which they measure themselves. They are not prepared to measure themselves on parameters which might diametrically change in the coming days.
Very, very well said, Jordy. And it's very congruent with John Boyd's OODA concept, of course, the observe, orient, decide, and act, that allows us,
Yes,
as an instrument, right, and a pattern, exactly. And I really appreciate what you're pointing out. You can't come in with a predefined recipe or template thinking it's going to right work for you, especially in uncertainty. Very, very much in
absolutely.
the world. Very much in the world. How about other stories to share? Any other sort of stories or insights that you'd like to share with us, Jordy?
Absolutely. Look, I'll give you a personal example of what I saw happening. I keep joking with my friends that we have a lot of political systems in the world, but I believe democracy is the most anti-fragile political system in the world. And why is it most anti-fragile? Look, if you take politics out of democracy, you will see that the core essence of democracy has always been to give power to people to think and decide what they want to do. This creates a sort of involvement of a person, which helps them learn better. And once they learn better, they try actually to do better the next time around. This is also true for organizations.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, as I wrote in my blog, a top-down decision may or may not succeed. And that is because people may or may not feel involved in it. But if you have an all-pervasive democratic way of decision making, and that works very well because people are very involved. Let me try and give you an example, a real life example of what happened. There was this company which had, and I can't name the company, apologize for that. I am also under certain NDAs of not naming companies. There was this company which had a couple of offices in Bangalore, and a couple of offices in another Indian city called Pune, and in Chennai. Uh, there are the three cities. Now, they used to provide services to different clients all across the world. One fine day, the CEO of India decided that that the offices in Bangalore were all disparate, wanted to combine all the offices into one single large office, took a decision, decided on a place, went out a very beautiful emailer to everyone saying, you know what? No longer are you sitting in small offices. You are going to sit in a very large office. It has a pool. It has a it has a basketball hoop. It has billiards tables. It has a badminton court. It has a lot of facilities out there. Come join us in that office and we will work together. And boom went the mailer to a lot of people. The office was a bit far away from the city, but apart from that, everything seemed very peachy. And the organization thought, hey, this is a good move. We are consolidating, we are saving money, we're getting people to work together. That's collaboration. Everything's going to be a thumbs up. And they started the move. And they immediately realized that people were not in favor of it. People started feeling this decision had been imposed upon them. For quite a few number of years, they were used to the environment that they were working in. They were used to the colleagues who were sitting next to them. And all of a sudden, that all being changed because the organization had also taken this decision of moving different teams around so that what they felt that similar teams sitting close to each other would collaborate better. Ultimately, what really ended up happening was people started having a sort of feeling that this had been forced down their throat. A lot of people started working from home. Now, on a superficial level, people would call this just to be a failure of an organizational change, a failure of or a failure to move offices. But there was something more deeper to it. See, what happens is when you work from home, what they did was they measured the internet speed from your home for connecting to a client machine. They realized that it was about 150 or 152 milliseconds more than if you would connect from office. That's because office had a much better internet connection. It had a dedicated pipe. So this means every time an employee started working from home, it actually resulted in a 40% drop in efficiency. You would take time to connect, you would take time to resolve an issue, time to update systems. And they could not get people to office. Every time they would try and get people to office, a lot of people wouldn't come to office. Ultimately, they realized that about 60% people had started working from home, coming to office. Things were still working out fine. Till what happened was a problem hit one of these large cities that this company was situated in, forced the load of the operations to shift to Bangalore.
Mm.
You had a lot of now you had a lot of people working from home, 40% inefficient, and they were the ones who were supposed to take all the load because one of the centers in a different city had gone down. The office tried to do what probably dictatorships tried to do. Sent out mailers saying you have to report to office, otherwise, boy, you're in deep trouble. And what happened next is what you can understand. A bunch of sick leaves flowed in. People didn't turn up for work. A company actually suffered a financial loss because it could not support customers. And they realized that the move, which they had touted to be game changing, was actually something that was really holding them back really hard. And they really had to get people on board. They really had to do something about it. So they employed a third party agency to plan another move. And what this company did was instead of trying to decide where to move, it came up with four options and gave employees four options for the new office to move to. As surprising as it may sound, all the four options were within 2 miles of the current office.
Mm.
Very far off, still very far off from the city, but four options. And now, instead of saying that the new office would have A, B, C, D facilities, they also gave the employees a choice of what facilities do they want in the new office, and also a choice of which team do you think should be next to you. And they created a campaign around it. The only condition of this campaign was you have to give three options for your office choices, three options for teams which will sit next to you, and three options for the facilities that you want. You can't just give one option, hit the vote button or the submit button and get away. Once this was over, they found out that most of the employees had chosen a location which was just 1.5 miles from the old office. Just 1.5 miles from the old office. And they had all chosen three facilities. And the three facilities happened to be a gym, happened to be, I think, it was a gym, a badminton court, and an open space. Not something that wasn't very costly. Now, the company decided to move. And the move was a great success. The move just wasn't a great success because people were involved. It was a great success because by moving to a place which was in the same what we call as rent zone, so you pay a similar amount of rent, but to a slightly smaller office with slightly lesser facilities to offer, you are actually saving money from the current one where people were refusing to come to. Second, people felt a lot more involved in it. They felt that, man, I had decided this location. So while when the new office was not the first choice of everyone, they figured out after the results of the survey that about 87% of the people had chosen this new office in one of their options. So if 87% people felt very involved in moving to the new office. Slowly people started coming back to office because they felt this is my office. I know the guy who sits next to me now because I'm the one who decided it. And hey, there is a facility that I want to use. I chose for it. It was a great success. People started coming back to office and they had attendance go up from a measly about 40%, somewhere in the higher ranges of 80%. I don't remember the exact figure. Not just this, the company was also now saving money because they had moved to a slightly smaller facility with lesser facilities to give, amenities to give to people. And they invested this money back in providing a better broadband internet to those 15, 16% people who finally couldn't make it to office. So all in all, it was a great move. Goes to show the power of democratizing a decision making rather than having an all pervasive top down, I want it so you do it sort of decision. The move was a success. Few years later, there was another such crisis that happened, but people were in the Bangalore office to support it, and the company actually never suffered a financial penalty because it couldn't support customers the last time it happened. I've always thought that this example is a great way of showing two things. First is you need to give powers to people who are acting on the ground, at least some powers. Second, I also feel, and it might sound a bit contradictory, but I also feel you just cannot give them a blank template and tell them to create it. People need help. Hence, in this case, they gave four options. They didn't just come and tell people, you know what, you will have to go and tell me where the new office is. So by guiding people on a path or by guiding people into choices that you feel is beneficial is the best way of getting the best out of it.
Well said.
That's what I felt.
Well said, Jordy. And there's a lot of nuances to the story, in particular around anti-fragility and what have you, amongst other things, quite honestly. So I really appreciate that. My good friend, I know we've taken a little bit of your time, and I want to respect your time. Any sort of closing thoughts? And I'm sure we'll have more opportunities for even deeper conversation. But any sort of closing thoughts in the next few minutes?
Absolutely. See, what I always have felt is anti-fragility is a journey. It is never an endpoint. Frankly speaking, it is never an endpoint that it is not a point that people should ever think about. We should always think about a journey on anti-fragility as a constantly learning, constantly evolving journey. As long as we are true to those ethics, I think in the days to come, we will be more anti-fragile than we were today. And that's all I have to say.
Very well said, my friend. Very well said. Jordy, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to all sorts of great things in the future together, and by all means. So thank you so much for making the time, Jordy.
Thank you so much. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you, Sid.
Thank you, Jordy.